Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm so excited to welcome background painter and art director Andy Clark to the podcast. Welcome, Andy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, I wanted to start by asking you about some of your favorite shows and characters growing up for you that helped influence your art style.
Oh, wow, interesting. Because I mean, growing up as a kid, it was, kind of the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Saturday morning cartoons, um, things like Johnny Quest were super awesome for me growing up. But the interesting thing is like I did not have the intention to go into animation when I started my art career. It was just sort of funny to find my way back there.
Oh, interesting. That's really cool. So then did you in college and stuff, did you study like when did you get into animation then and realize you wanted to do that for your career?
Yeah, so I originally went to art school to learn how to draw and paint. Basically, I wanted to be an illustrator and do like Time magazine covers and talk about really, big issues. And some of my heroes were Brad Holland and Matt Mahurin, um, and that sort of for illustration. But after about my seventh term at Art Center, I realized I needed to get a job, and being an illustrator really meant, um, supplementing my own income in other ways. So a lot of my friends were getting recruited into the animation industry. That's when DreamWorks kind of started and was scouring the colleges for talent, and I was lucky enough to kind of be at the end of that pool. And so I got my first job at Hanna-Barbera Cartoons in 1996.
Oh, really cool. So I'd love to hear about in terms of because of course like being a background painter. So I'd love to hear kind of when you're making these backgrounds for all of these shows and stuff, how much freedom do you have in terms of actually coming up with the aesthetic of the show? I'm sure like with each show there's a certain color palette to follow and things like
Mhm,
that, but then do you have a
mhm.
discussion with the showrunner and things like that when you develop these backgrounds?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few different departments in an animation pipeline, and background painting is towards the um, end of that production pipeline. And so, it usually falls to the art director and the creator to kind of determine the look of the show. And it's a lot of time spent early on in the development of the show to kind of get that established. And then it's basically a matter of just duplicating and emulating that. And the thing about being a background painter is that we have many background painters on a show, and they all have to look like they're coming from one person. And that keeps continuity of the show, and everything sort of like that. So as the background painter, I get my direction from the art director, who's already worked out a lot of those, you know, details for that specific shot, or it's a specific sequence within an animated series, or even with feature, that we kind of get into that. So I'm basically following the direction of the art director, who's working with the creator of the show, and what's ever going on in the story. Background is about supporting the story. We sort of have a job where it has to look really cool, but not so cool that all you want to do is look at the background. They have to really support the story, because the story is the biggest part of it.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, because
Yeah.
obviously following the characters, of course. I'd love to hear specifically because I'm a big fan of Nickelodeon. So I'd love to hear how you first, like your first job working at Nickelodeon in
Yeah,
particular.
yeah, yeah. So I was coming off of a show called Dexter's Lab over at Hanna-Barbera, and I brought my portfolio over to Nickelodeon, which was basically, they had a small building off of Cahuenga in Los Angeles, and that was sort of the admin buildings. And then they basically had an office that they were renting in a dental office. So we were kind of like as in the early days of Nickelodeon, it was before they sort of established themselves as, a brick and mortar animation studio. So I got my first job working on SpongeBob SquarePants. The art director at that time was Nick Jennings, and Nick's an awesome art director and has a great sense of style and how to really bring the most out of people. And that's really important as an art director, to get the best out of your artists.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I know I was looking at your website. I saw you had a background of jellyfish fields, like, and that's like so iconic. It's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah, yeah. I was, SpongeBob was such a fortunate thing. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better opportunity. I really was just good timing on my part, and I was actually art directing another project at the same time that we were developing that project, and the art director Nick Jennings says, "Oh, this is going to be really big. You need to come over to SpongeBob. You need to work with us." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I've got a good thing going here, And he managed to talk me into it, and I'm glad that he did, because it's probably the fondest memory that I have, one of the fondest memories, and the best time that I've ever had. And those moments in animation and sort of production are rare, and when you have one of those, it and you hold on to it, because it doesn't last forever. It sure was fun doing it. We had a great crew. A lot of those people have gone to do amazing other things, and work with other people. Of course, Steven Hillenburg is his icon, and a wonderful story in his journey. So, SpongeBob definitely one of the fondest memories I have.
That's wonderful. That's interesting hearing too when people are realizing how big that, like realizing how big the show was becoming, because yeah, I remember as a kid, like my friends and I, all of us quoting it, talking about SpongeBob. Like, that's so
Yeah.
fun. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, it really, and again, Steven Hillenburg is really a creative genius in the way, even in the way that he was pitching the show to Nickelodeon, because it was really not like anything else that Nick had done or was looking to do. They were kind of coming off the highs of Ren and Stimpy and that sort of thing, and along comes Steven Hillenburg with this crazy Sponge, and they knew they had a hit when he pitched it, and so yeah, thank God that he did. It's really been sort of become a part of Americana, I think.
I know, definitely, because yeah, SpongeBob now he's up there with other iconic cartoon characters, and it's just no signs of stopping with SpongeBob too, with all of the
Yeah, no, I think
spin-off
they're
shows
still.
now. Mhm.
Yeah. And yeah, so yeah, those things just kind of keep going, and it's going to be a part of a lot of people's lives, so it's really cool.
Yeah, and honestly, just the purity of it, of this optimism, that is so important too. Like just like the simplicity of that. So yeah, it's
Yeah, well, I mean, he really explored, not only the sort of hilarity of cartoons, and there's a lot of physical comedy and that sort of thing, but it was also geared intellectually towards adults, and I'm using my words here because I don't know exactly if Steve felt that way, but it's to remind ourselves that, we are children at heart, and to be optimistic and lighthearted. And, he was an internal optimist, like nothing is going to get him down. He's always going to find a way. And it's such a wonderful message, especially right now in the
absolutely.
world, So yeah, so fortunate to have been a part of that, and still going. And, it's been a part of like how I'm introduced to people. It's like I make friends and they're like, "Oh, he worked on SpongeBob SquarePants." It's like, it's great. And after a while, it's like, I'm not SpongeBob SquarePants. It's like I've gone on to do other things too. But I totally get it.
That's cool though. It gives you some clout. That is really cool.
Well, yeah,
Awesome.
and it's like I don't know how much I deserve the clout, because again, it just felt like good timing on my part. Um, but yeah, it's nice to have that feeling of being a part of something that a lot of people have grown to share. You know, I don't. Yeah, definitely highlight.
That's wonderful. I do want to go back actually because you did mention Dexter's Lab, and that show
Yeah,
was that the first like original Cartoon Network show? I mean, or like one of the, I mean, obviously in the 90s, because I know Gendy now, he
yeah.
really is Gendy Tartakovsky, he's like a visionary. He's gone on to
Oh
create
yeah.
Samurai Jack, so many other
Oh
amazing
yeah.
Primal. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I've really again been really fortunate. I had some really good timing to have worked with like these really creative geniuses. Kendi's amazing. Um, we, you know, they had just started their first season on Dexter's Lab when the Time Warner merger was starting to happen, and kind of concurrently at the same time that that was all getting started, they were doing sort of reboots of Johnny Quest. Um, they were doing a show called Johnny Bravo, which Seth MacFarlane actually worked on, and so you know they had a lot of things that they were kind of moving through the pipes and stuff that they were trying to reboot from the old days. But yeah, again, yeah, working with people like Gendy Turkhouse is amazing. Yeah, he's really forward. He's really forward thinking.
that's awesome. And so then going back to SpongeBob again, because I know also you worked on the movie. So how does that compare with the series, or is that similar in terms of the, actual making backgrounds and things like that?
No, it changes. It changes a little bit because
Mhm.
you know, there's sort of the mechanical stuff or like the aspect ratio and that sort of thing from like television format to feature format, letterbox. Things become more cinematic. And what that means is just really working towards designing the shot and making sure that each shot has got its own sort of character and again reinforces the story. So, you know, we do things a little bit differently. The production schedule's a little bit longer because it takes, let's see, on the movie, it took us about 2.5 years, 2 years to do it. And so we have a little bit more time to paint. And that time we were still using traditional paint. And I think they probably still are on the show. I don't know 100%, but on the movie, we used a combination of traditional paint and scanning things in and using Photoshop to sort of augment, sort of polish up so that there was more sort of depth of fields and more, you know, the world, you could feel the world. It was more spacious. When you look at the television series, it's all, you know, it's more flat to camera, if that makes sense.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. I imagine too, because so longer production time, then obviously a bigger budget with the feature. So that does make sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and actually the budget was small.
Oh,
I think it was like $48 million or something around that. But you know, it's again, Steve was so is really on point because you know everybody knew that they had something on their hands, and you know what Steve wanted to do was to make a feature film, and Nickelodeon wasn't really ready to commit to doing a feature film so quickly with somebody who's, you know, yeah, you've got a great idea, but you're not really proven. And so we went through a total of 2 seasons, and then Steve said, "That's it. I'm not doing it anymore." And that kind of put a ripple through the network, and they kind of came to the table and agreed to do a movie. So pretty well played, my friend.
wow. That's interesting to
Yeah,
hear.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. These are all the stories that you don't you don't really get to hear, except for you know, quiet corners.
Absolutely. And that's why I do find it so fascinating, the industry stuff behind it, because then obviously, again, SpongeBob being this absolute phenomenon now. So yeah, with
Right.
multiple, yeah, projects. That's really
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
I'd love to hear too about. I'm also a big fan of Angry Beavers. I saw you worked on Angry Beavers. I've been
yeah.
going down with all your projects. Yeah.
Oh my God. So that was the show that I uh, shared art direction credit with one other person on the last seasons of Angry Beavers. And yes, it's just really wacky stuff. I really enjoyed working on that show, and that was another one that was, kind of in the process in the early days. We're talking like 95, 94. Mitch Shower, I'm not sure what he's up to these days, but yeah, good stuff.
That show is unique too, because there's several episodes where like just the two beavers alone just getting into wacky hijinks. You just have those two and they carry the show. Like, yes, they have other characters, but like talk about just them in the
Yeah,
dam. They're ridiculous. It's so hilarious, that show. Um,
yeah. Again, it's like it's such a treat to not every show that you work on are you going to have such an attachment to. Some are, jobs, and then some are really special and they feel like just play. And again, I've been really fortunate to have a couple of those in my career. Super fun memories.
Nice. Yeah, I enjoy hearing about your perspective of all this. I did also want to ask you about, of course, ChalkZone too, because I always wanted to know about actual ChalkZone and like how you guys created the chalk-like designs in ChalkZone itself.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to
yeah.
hear about
Yeah,
that.
that so again, we're using things like Photoshop, and you know I was at Nickelodeon right when we got the first computers with Photoshop on it. It was really the early days, and they brought in somebody to teach us basically. And so, we're taking that and sort of taking the original Chalk Zone look and digitizing it. Basically, there was a lot of development work in taking that, because it was being done traditionally primarily, um, and so it had to be sort of translated into the digital realm, and that took a bit of work. That show was challenge, but super fun.
I wanted to ask you too about, so like it's despite Nickelodeon too, but I wanted to ask you, I saw you worked on Looney Tunes Back in Action, that movie. How'd that come about? I'd love to hear about that experience too.
You know what? I think so. That's on my IMDb, but I think that's a mistake. I did not work on that show.
Oh my God. You know what? This has happened more than once where I brought something up and they would say, nope, I didn't work on that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
IMDb.
yeah. I went to, as you do in the industry, you check your IMDb once in a while, and I did, and I came across that, and no, I don't, maybe freelanced it. I don't know.
Hmm.
So anyway, can't take credit for that.
Okay, no problem. I did want to ask you too, though, tell me if this is accurate or not, that I don't know how long ago it was, but maybe over a decade ago at this point, that there was going to be a reboot of the Flintstones under Seth
Mm,
MacFarlane, but that never came to fruition. Was that something
hmm
you got to work on, or like what was all
Well,
that?
no, yeah, no, that is correct. That is another one of the big highlights. I left Nickelodeon, I want to say around like 2012, 2013. I had spent quite a bit of time on SpongeBob, and was, ready to just kind of spread my wings and try other things. And a friend of mine who knew one of the producers over at Fox and made an introduction, and I met with them, and they liked my approach, and we went into development. So we were all scheduled to launch it. It was this is the one that got away. There's always sort of the one that got away, and this is the one that got away. Um,
Oh, interesting.
because yeah, because again, you asked me at the beginning of the interview what my sort of beginning interests were. And the Flintstones was one of them. And to think that I would come full circle in that way was just amazing. To, it's like getting to meet your superhero, you know, superstar, sports idol or something. Um, so yeah, we got all the way through development, and we were beginning to write the first episode, and they had rented, I think, a couple floors over on Wilshire, next to the Fox complex, and they even found the Flintstones car and they
Oh,
put it up
really?
and they brought it up to the eighth floor on the freight elevator. That was pretty cool. So yeah, they were all scheduled to do this. We were getting ready to launch, and on a Thursday afternoon, one of the writers came into my office and said, "We just got canceled." I said, "You're joking, right?" And he's like, "No, Seth actually did an interview last night where he said that he was not going to go through it." And I was, yeah, floored, my jaw dropped to the ground. It's like, wow, like, okay, wow,
Yeah,
what a disappointment. And it happened. It happens.
that is
So
unfortunate, but I
yeah,
know.
yeah. Well, and yeah, for me, it was the one that got away for sure. But I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, they do have something in the works. I don't know if it's with Seth, but I think that they are working on some first up stuff.
I do recall there was something because yeah, I think another it's going to be more I forget now, something more geared towards adults though, like some I forget, but yeah, I do
Yeah.
seem to recall.
Well,
Well, I
that was the whole Seth MacFarlane plan. Was to take this American cartoon and turn it into The Simpsons, basically. And I think that's pretty much what the intention was. And Seth has got a wry sense of humor and is a genius in his own right. But I think that and I'm speculating here. I think that the values that with Warner Brothers, intellectual property kind of came into conflict with Seth MacFarlane wanted like full reign over the characters and to be able to write whatever. And knowing Seth MacFarlane, you don't know what you're going to get. So, uh, yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why they decided not to go through with it.
oh, it's too bad though.
Yep.
I mean, because he also is a visionary as well. He's still got Family Guy still going. He's also just very talented with music. You
Yeah.
had Orville, a million other things. Yeah, so
Oh gosh. Yeah. The guy can do 100 different voices.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So talented. American Dad, so much fantastic
Yeah.
stuff. But I
Yeah.
imagine then with a huge property like the Flintstones, that because it's so, I don't know what the word is, like
Well, it's
because these,
iconic. It's
yes,
iconic.
yes.
It's like it's iconic, and the sort of the idea is like how much can you stretch the iconography and sort of expand it without ruining or tarnishing, the traditional aspect of it, right? So to me it makes sense, because you know I think as artists it's like we work really hard to create something, and then once we've created it, it is what it is, and then it goes out into the world as it is, and then I'm sort of on to the next thing, and that's just part of the creative process. And so, like with SpongeBob and all of the sort of spin-offs, it's like I'm kind of conflicted in it, honestly, because I kind of feel like it should just be what it was. And I think that's what Steve Hillenburg would have wanted, and not to just be kind of spun through the system and commercialized and diced up and sliced up and turned into little cubicles.
Right, I
You
hear
know?
you. Well,
Yeah.
because also another example that's coming to mind to me now is like Scooby-Doo, because that again, Hanna-Barbera, and that has had so many iterations and projects
Hmm.
and things
Yeah.
that have deviated from the premise. Like Velma was a thing, and like that
Yeah.
certainly mixed reaction. So I don't know. I do find it interesting. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I find it interesting, and I feel it frustrating. I feel it frustrating too, because
Mm.
the abilities that the studios have to actually find good stories, good content is there. They just kind of refuse to go into it. But yeah, I mean, everybody's looking for the next hit. But in the world of streaming, it's really fast, and so these long duration formats are, you're not going to see as many of them. And I think that was part of the writer strike as well, as the writers were pushing back on the length of productions. And we feel that in animation too, quite frankly. I mean, I think there's definitely solidarity with the artists and the writers together, because we sort of endure the same system. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. You know,
Yeah.
this I did want to ask you about, so this is like a good segue, your opinion on the current state of the animation industry with things like we're seeing
Hmm.
more
Hmm.
reboots of beloved projects as live action. We're seeing more recently now, unfortunately, jobs being outsourced. I would love to hear your opinion on the current state of the animation industry.
Well, thanks for the opportunity because I'm really
Hmm.
passionate about this actually. Well, I've partially spoken to it. It's like the studios are trying to find content that they can just bankroll and make money with. And whether you're making an animated series or it's live action or whatever, all of the people that are associated with that, are affected by what happens. So to give you an example, in the early days of production, well, let's go back even further. So animation studios had departments, and these departments fed the animation pipeline. So you have the layout department, you have character department, you have props, backgrounds, right? And then there's sort of overseers, you have supervisors, and then you have the artists underneath the supervisors. So whatever the studio is producing, it could be anything. It was moving through that pipeline, right? And so people that were working, the artists, the writers, had a sense of stability and security in their job. And they had the unions were present, and people could retire on their pensions, and you know you can make a decent living. Well, that changed dramatically, like in the early or mid '90s, when the studios realized that they could sort of downsize and create in separate entity companies for that project. And so it would be an affiliated production, right? When Steve Hillenburg did SpongeBob, he formed his own company. And then that company under that umbrella does business with Nickelodeon, who produces it. And so that there's some separation there. And so what that does is that all the people that work on those productions, when that production ends, all of those people go back into the workforce. And so in the old days, a production animated series, we have what are called pickups. And so the studios would order a certain amount of episodes. And those episodes were based on sort of algorithms of what they call them reruns, right? So they knew how many they had to make so that they could put them into the reruns and keep people sort of interested in watching television, right? And so those productions would last maybe 2.5 years, 26 half hours, and two cartoons per half hour and commercials in between. And now, that's how it was in the old days. And so when the production ended, everybody went back in the workforce. Everybody had to go look for a job again. But the ideas of having departments within the studios went away. So that freed up the studios a lot, and it made the studios a lot of money when they did it. And that, it changed the way that you went about looking for work. Now all of a sudden everybody wants to be an animation artist. Of course they do. It's awesome. But that's the way that the studios keep the artists, the writers, the creators sort of at odds. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
So now fast forward to streaming. We've seen the previous model. Fast forward to streaming. Now studios are saying, well, instead of doing these long format productions that are going to take 2 years to do, and we're going to have to employ all these people, now we're going to do streaming. So we have a shorter production time, 6 months, 6 months production, 6 to 9 months production time instead of 2.5 years. Okay. Same people in the production, right? Same department. So, individual. And now you've only really got work for 6 to 9 months, and then you're kicked out on kind of back into the workforce, and you got to do it again. And you can probably imagine that after a while, that's exhausting. You can't really, there's no security in that for the artist or the writer who's, producing the content. And I think that, back to your original question, this is one of the biggest parts of the conversation. Just like the writers want the sort of residual for their streaming time that counts basically as a normal production sort of schedule. So you talk about a seminal moment. I mean, I think this is a seminal moment. It's sort of we're moving into an era of content is king. And whatever, who can come up with the best content, because you've got all of these avenues in which to produce it: graphic novel, cartoon, feature, book, CD, podcast. You get the idea. And the studios recognize that, and that's what that fight about AI is about, right? Because they almost don't need us, but they need us.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's I really want to speak to the younger generation if I can have that opportunity to really work together. We do have an animation union. Frankly, I'm strongly positioned that they don't do enough for us in this regard. We are basically scraping for every morsel from the table from the networks. I mean, you can just look at the numbers, $25 million golden parachutes. So it doesn't take rocket science to just look at the numbers. And so I kind of realized this several years ago, and I started talking to my friends within the industry. And, I'm more excited right now about working with artists that want to share. And what that means is that there's a common interest. And so everybody makes a residual. Everybody, soup to nuts. You profit share the whole thing. There's no vertical hierarchy. It's a horizontal hierarchy. There are production heads and leaders, but if that thing succeeds and it goes out to be a SpongeBob, every one of those people should benefit. Every one of them, in my opinion. And so it's sort of a seminal moment of us and them. It's like, I really want the artists and the writers and the creative people to really take stock in what they share together and their ability, because we don't the networks anymore. We really don't. One of the other interesting awarenesses that I had as I was working in animation, kind of coming up with my own ideas for production, is that between all of the people that I knew in my life, I could form a production company. I could fill every department from just my friends. And that just got me thinking. It's like, and each one of my friends has an idea that they want to see brought forward. And that's what really sparked the notion of like, wow, what if we just developed a content company? Right?
Oh, see, that's an exciting prospect. It's true.
Right. Yeah, it's really true. It's really true. It's like the whole purpose of the company is to produce content and find avenues for distribution. Right, where should it manifest? Sometimes people have ideas and they're like, I just have this idea and I know it's great, I just don't know what to do with it. It's like, well, okay, is it a book? Is it a graphic novel? Is it a children's story? Like, guiding through that creative process. Because here's the other notion, is like every culture, and as we get more global, I think this is going to be more true. Every culture has sets of stories and they resonate with those cultures. There are big swaths of people that have common culture. So you talk the Hindus, who have their whole pantheon and philosophy of stories and the stories that they tell. And that's a huge market, frankly. If you could tap into the stories of this other culture and bring those stories forward, in other words, help them produce that, you've just given yourself, a gigantic swath of the market, because you're just interested in producing content and telling stories globally, right? I think it was like Joseph Campbell who talked about the archetypes that cultures, you know, sort of manifest and bring forward that are so similar. And those are all from our stories. So I hope that this moment becomes an opportunity for the creatives to take back their power and realize that they don't really they need each other. They don't need the corporations. It's like, that's why every time you talk to somebody who works on a production, they say it was like a family, right? Don't you hear that?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. You know why? Because it was. Because when you come together in the creative process like that, you are creating a seminal moment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why. So it's important.
Listen, I appreciate you sharing all of this. This was extremely just enlightening hearing you say all of that. So what that all boils down to is humanity, treating people fairly, like giving people a voice, and like screw this AI stuff, to put it bluntly, so I sincerely appreciate hearing you say
yeah, thanks. I mean, as far as the AI goes, I think it's a tool in a toolbox, but it can't replace human creativity.
Exactly. That was a big thing in the writer's strike. That's certainly a big thing ongoing with the SAG-AFTRA strike. So yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, it always goes back to people, everything that could resonate with people, as you alluded to as well, like other stories globally, and going back to our own humanity, how that connects all of us. So it's so true. Yeah.
I mean, and that's what makes the genre so important, because it has the power to do that, and that really changes things. It can be a positive change maker. Back to SpongeBob being the optimist is, again, like, this is an important message. That's what storytelling does. And it's not just the American story. It's the Hindu story. It's the Buddhist story. It's the Afghani story. So yeah. I could go on and on and on about it. I really feel like it's a really important moment within the industry. I know I've been really fortunate to be able to knit together a consistent career for 23 years. I don't know how hard it's going to be for people coming up to be able to have that level of consistency in the way that the production companies are proposing forward. I don't know how you can work for 6 months and then have to go find another job. That just doesn't seem sustainable to me.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It doesn't. And with everybody who wants to be a part of it, right? Everybody wants to go to Hollywood and be a writer. Well, they want to be an artist or an art director. It's like, yeah, awesome. But the corporations are totally fine creating the sense of infighting or pressure within the sort of creative side, and I think that they actually thrive on that, right? They get us sort of pushing back and competing against each other, and it takes all of the focus off of them putting us in this predicament in the first place.
You're right. Wow. I never, yeah. Think about
right?
it. I'm like, huh.
Right. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the whole idea. It's like, I mean, back in the old days, it was Burbank, California. That's where we made cartoons. Now you can be in Poland. You could literally be remote in a van life in the Utah desert and be doing it. Everybody's doing it. And that just means that the whole pressure of the situation to just be able to put together enough is going to get bigger, I feel.
What I find interesting too, obviously, is like you just said, a lot of people are trying to break in. Myself too, I'm a writer. I'm out here in California. I'm trying to, get repped and everything. So work on my stuff. But what I find interesting is basically anyone can just, which is both good, but also makes it more competitive, I guess you could say. Anyone could just I could make my own comic or whatever, and I could just put it online and then hope it'll find an audience, like things like that. You could just do your own things, of course, but a matter of trying to reach a bigger audience and sell things and sustain a living in this industry is what's, uncertain.
How about the opportunity to work on a production with Seth MacFarlane or with Gandhi
Right?
Tarkovsky. Imagine that as a masterclass. Imagine if all of the sort of those creative geniuses were able to pull it together. We would have so much more pull. We would have so much more power. They would be knocking our doors down to get to us, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my goodness. This has been such an enlightening conversation, but this is fantastic. I did want to ask you, like now it's like pivoting back to a couple more things in terms of stuff
Sure.
you've worked on. So I wanted to ask you about, because you've worked on the Great North and Central Park, of course, like in that Bob's Burgers universe. I'd love to hear about
Yeah.
that a
Yeah.
little as well.
Well, yeah, I had the opportunity to go to Bento Box, and I did not work on Bob's Burgers, but I did work on the Great North and Central Park. Um, I'll say this: every studio has its sort of culture, its vibe, and Bento Box definitely has theirs, and it just feels a little bit more corporate for me. And again, from an artistic perspective, that makes it challenging.
Oh, I hear ya. Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate what you said too, essentially that, for certain projects, they resonate with you personally. For certain ones, it's a job. And so, but
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Fun.
I'll tell you what the number one highlight is. Can I tell you that?
Yeah, please.
Getting the opportunity to work with Carl Sagan's widow, Andrew Yin, on
Oh,
the
wow.
Cosmos series. Another opportunity to work with Seth. I've worked with him twice, and that's probably the highlight. I remember walking into the conference room, like I think to meet Anne for the first time, and there was a giant banner in the middle of the wall, and it said, "Creating moments of wonder," and that just really struck me. That this person was really about the creative spirit and the creative act, and wanting to inspire people, and it was just like, yeah. And so it was really the motivator and sort of the impetus in the style, which I basically created, sort of based on sort of window boxes and old puppetry, like Hindu puppetry or Thai puppetry, creating sort of sets, and then they're basically 2D, but you move them in 3D. Anyway, yeah, definitely the highlight.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really cool. And so what are you currently working on that you're able to share about?
Well, now that the writer's strike is over, I'm back in production on a project with Sony, helping them develop some stuff. Nothing I can sort of share right now other than that.
Oh, cool. That's exciting though. And
yeah,
so I love ending my interviews by asking any advice. So that could be advice for aspiring artists, animators, life advice, any advice that you'd love to share.
Yeah. Go in the direction of your fear. Everything that you want is on the other side of that.
Well said. I wholeheartedly agree. It's very true. Andy, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please feel free to share your social media, anything else you want to promote.
Yeah, no, nothing really to promote. I mean, you can check out my website at andyclark.us. Yeah, contact me for more info. My little friend here is checking out the dogs in the neighborhood.
Oh, so cute. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Allison. I really appreciate it.
And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com, and as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next episode, speaking of the animation industry, I will be sharing all about my experience attending ToonCon. It was an absolute blast, so stay tuned for that. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.